Hello, this is Chris.
And Jared.
We're back again, talk some crap.
I've anticipated this one being particularly rough, so I brought my flask, my 64-ounce flask, to kind of take the edge off of it, which is full of real vodka, by the way. And I'm going to pour this shot because
All the way
I'm going
full?
to need it. Well, it was. My friend bought this for me as a joke, and then I never used it. And then this year, I got a backpack where I could carry my longboard with me, so I could ride my bike to places and longboard. I was bummed out because my normal backpack can hold like a big bottle of liquor if I want to go hang out with my friends and ride my bike there, but this backpack couldn't. And then I pulled this out, and it slides in like a glove. So I've actually been using this to
That's funny.
transport alcohol, but we'll leave this right here, and I'm sure I'll need it at some point.
So I don't. This might be the first time we kind of venture into TikTok land. I don't know if it's all TikTok. I guess we could pull it from anywhere. Flip and I both have said that like we kind of got away from all the ex-Mormon stuff. And actually what pulled me back into it was noticing some postmodern apologetics. That was the only reason I ever started listening to them. And when I first started listening to the Midnight Mormons, I thought they were kind of pulling some of that stuff. I even kind of I think the very first comment I made was sort of like was kind of admonishing Quaku, like, oh, don't go down that route. Don't do that stuff too. Like, I don't think that they are anywhere near. I mean, once in a while they'll kind of drop stuff because it's just kind of the lingo of the times nowadays. But they're not postmodern apologists. But I started noticing a bunch of other random, weird postmodern apologists, and I knew that there was, as we've already talked about here, this trad movement of postmodernists. And I thought the Mormon apologists, I think in Fair and Farms, they even kind of start using some arguments that they pull out of philosophy and postmodernism. But there's definitely like this group of people who come out of divinity schools. It's kind of the divinity schools. I don't know how else to say it. Divinity School Mormons.
And it's definitely the most active I've been in the ex-Mormon community in a long time.
Really?
I kind of most of my activity in it over the years has been my wife will have me on her channel every now and then. We'll talk about it, but I'm on Facebook all the time and arguing with people, and I'd argue with people on ex-Mormon things, but I mostly stayed out of it. I didn't really care, but there's been like an explosion of nonsense lately. Well, they've never been particularly good. Like ex-Mormons really seem to think that they're like the best critical thinkers in the world, and I don't think they have any. Like I think if you looked at if you had some God that could look at critical thinking skills and give you a number on it, I think the number of critical thinking within and without the church would be probably identical.
Yeah, I'd say about the same too. I don't know, maybe that's across the board. I've always said to people that because you leave a church, you now don't have your certification of rational thinker, and you get to put it on your wall now. And so many people take it like that. But there's a lot of stuff of people kind of doing studies and finding that out over the years. And at first, it was really obvious that a bunch of people who were now atheists or whatever got into stuff like stones and which really surprised people. It would surprise people like Michael Shermer and
the crystal shit.
Yeah. So that's not even really a problem in this Mormon ex-Mormon world, but it became like a problem in like the atheist world that just because people like left Christianity or something didn't mean they weren't gonna start doing horoscopes and stuff like that. But the postmodern using that term, man.
The postmodern neo-Marxists.
I know. And I love Peterson for bringing it to people's attention, but then of course whoever also brought the attention is going to be like the lightning rod it was always going to be that way. If it wasn't Peterson, whoever finally made the people in the US or the Western world wake up to what was going on with that in a way of pushing back on it, they were going to be a lightning rod.
They rarely even criticize him on that anymore because there's so many of them that are like, yeah, I'm a postmodern neo-Marxist.
I know.
Fuck you.
I pulled up some clips of some actually saying, and I actually appreciate when they do that. Like, I just appreciate
like honesty. Plastic pill guy or whatever.
Yeah. And I appreciate when people are just honest in what they are or who they are. And I think
even
that's
if they're just honestly evil.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think right when I come out of the gate, some people will even criticize maybe Peterson for it because Peterson's always kind of like right on the edge of do you believe or do you not believe, and he won't give an answer on it. And I think just right coming out the gate, even saying when I went on the Midnight Mormons the first time or with anybody, I just get that out the way. I say right out the gate, it's like, just take me. I think a lot more about it, and I'm working out and all that stuff. But just take me as like I'm trying to make arguments and view it from like an atheistic worldview. Like we're here and we're stuck with just ourselves.
So I actually I love this quote. It's always attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if it was actually him. It's that what is it? Pray as if everything depends on God, and work as if everything depends on you. And I think that's
awesome.
That's probably the ideal way to believe in God, or to not believe in God. You know, like
For sure.
I think either like religious and irreligious people should both, you know, put in effort as if everything depends on their effort.
I agree.
Going with that.
No, I totally agree that that's like a good way to take it. And I'm just talking about when we enter into the arena, because we're everybody's always asking, why do you get into the arena at all? How dare you get into the arena where everybody else is in the arena? Well, how dare you have an opinion where everybody else has an opinion? Like, why do you care where everybody else cares?
Literally, how does it even affect you?
Where it affects everybody else. And that's one of the irritations with all that. But obviously, just to not be hide the ball on people too hard or anything like that. If they ask, I'll just come straight out and say, I'm trying to communicate. I'm trying to make my points from a view that we're just stuck with us, you know, and I'm fine with you having your view that that's not how it is, especially if you're straightforward and open with it. Like we frequently say about the Midnight Mormons, like the difference between their metaphysical claims and the leftist Marxist metaphysical claims is that the Midnight Mormons say it's a religion, and the other ones are doing a religion, but they're not saying it's a religion, they're saying it's science. And that's just a bastardization of science, and that's directly the Marxist. And then it's all sorts of weird stuff coming from political realm now that people try to do this sort of scientism and announce stuff that's obviously assertions or claims off the top of their butts, and they cock their head backs and say it's science. But these guys that we're covering today, the Divinity Skool guys, I think they are less believing than I am.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
And you wouldn't know that. You'd have to talk to them for 20 hours to get to that point. They're less believing than Peterson is. They have rationalized it all, and in a Gnostic way, they think they have all the answers to that stuff. That's usually one of my frustrations, at least the ones that we're looking at here. I don't know if it's everybody coming out of Divinity Skool, but it seems like it to me, my sample size. Yeah, that everybody coming out of Divinity Skool is like a Gnostic. They're people who think that they got to all the answers through their knowledge.
Yeah, that was like the last interaction I had with Jackson Washburn. Was he might have blocked me. I don't remember if he did or didn't, but it was when he was going through his faith crisis for Lent. He's just like,
I have that pulled up. I'll pull it up right now.
Okay. Well, I basically just like, eventually I kind of got to the point where I kind of threw my hands up in the air and was like, I don't think you really believe in Mormonism.
Exactly.
It's like, I have a strong testimony in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You absolutely don't. You're giving it up. These strong convictions that you have, you're just like, well, I'm going to not have those anymore for a month.
They'll get pedantic about that. If you said that to them, you already know that you're going to get a pedantic Divinity Skool answer back about that. Well, what does believe mean? I do believe. I have a strong conviction. You know, it's going to be all based off of their redefinitions and reconfigurations. And
sure, but like I can tell them what I mean, which is you don't believe that
you don't believe the way Mormons believe.
Yeah, you don't believe that God instructed Joseph Smith to translate the gold plates into a literal living scripture, and you don't believe that the prophet leads the one true church today. Like you know what I mean by that. I hate it when they pretend they don't know what you mean.
Yeah, they pretend they don't, or they're just ready with all the rhetorical. We'll use the Dan McClellan word. You're rhetorically trying to play a game of power on us to make a point, and we know what you're doing with the rhetoric. I made a comment to him back on this, and we got into like a big back and forth, and it got salty. It got internet salty, which means we started getting insulty in that internet way, and he was every bit as insulty as I was. I mean, everywhere you go. One of the first, I was going to start out this whole thing by asking you, like, do you ever feel like you're acting out a way I've talked about it is we've always had this criticism in ex-Mormonism of we watch the general authorities. Well, it's within Mormonism too. You watch the general authorities and they learn a way of talking and a way of being to sound and act a certain way. And it's everywhere. It's like in corporate culture. They'll act out and put like a certain way of piety, or the way they give their testimony. There's a cadence to it. And and even in the video that we showed yesterday of that stake president talking about all missionaries need to go on a mission, he was practicing the cadence.
Do young men have to go, or is it a choice? Now, young men, I hope you'll think about this carefully, because there's an important doctrine here. Do you have a choice whether to serve a mission?
These guys, all these Divinity Skool guys, whenever they start giving their stuff or start preaching stuff, I think they're all kind of putting on this cadence of piety, and it drives me crazy. And I was wondering, like, do I put on any acts like that? Do I ever feel like I'm stopping and having to stop and put on an act so people believe that what I'm talking about is ultra sincere or ultra deep or something like that? Do you feel like you ever do it?
So, I mean, I'll try different. So my weakness is that I come into it wanting to just throw snark at everyone because, like, it's just so obviously absurd. A lot of the things that they're saying, like this Jackson Washburn thing. Where
I came
up.
in. You saw I came in hot at Jackson Washburn, and I also you saw me. I came in hot at Dan McClellan, and both of them were just. I'm just not taking them serious at all from second one, and they might say you're not arguing in good faith, but that's true. It's true that on the internet, Facebook, whatever, I wasn't. I just came out saying, "Give me a break." It was ultimately what it was, But
I know. Well, I mean, I wouldn't even call that bad faith arguing. That's just like you're being pretty honest about what bad faith arguing is, where you pretend to be. Awesome.
But I agree, it doesn't like start from the point where we're really going to hash this out right here. But we saw in both the cases, you and I start from that level, right? And I think that's who we are. That's obviously who we are on this channel. It's who Flip is. It's who Kevin. We start from who we start and we stay at that. These guys have this whole air of piety of this thing. We're putting up this big Divinity Skool, galaxy brain, super pious, super smart and pious. And then if we come at them, they devolve into internetness like that. I mean, it goes so fast.
Well, I think McClellan's smart enough to feel the pull of being like devolving into that, and that's the cadence he wants to put out is like he is mirroring Sam Harris, not in the words that he says, but the way that he says it is exactly. It's like he just practices in the mirror. Like, I need to sound like Sam Harris in every single way. I need to have mannerisms similar to his,
and it needs to come off the most rational thing that's ever been rational. And
sure.
I have been asked recently to talk more about the Book of Mormon, so I want to share the piece of advice that I usually give when people ask me how to better understand it. If you want to understand the Book of Mormon better, you should approach it as a piece of 19th century literature. This is not to say anything about its origins or to say you cannot maintain a conviction that it is an English translation of an ancient source text. It is to say, whatever its origins, it is written in 19th century English for a 19th century target audience. This is made clear by a number of literary and linguistic conventions that are native to that time period. So the better you can understand the literary, rhetorical, ideological, historical context of that time period, get your 1828 Webster's out, read some of the other literature from that time period. The better you can do that, the better you will come to understanding.
But there's such a performance in it too, because if you watch most of his TikToks, somebody will say something, they'll start with a thing cut in his face like, okay, let's hear it.
So that's where we're going to start, the basics, okay?
All right, let's see some basics.
15 things Mormon missionaries will not tell you about Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism.
Uh-oh, here goes my objectivity out the window.
His publisher is in hot water for changing scripture to fit with gender ideology.
Okay, let's see it.
Died over multiple times.
All right, let's see it.
And I can never picture myself stopping and doing a little performance like that, because you don't need to put in the okay, let's hear it there, because that person's going to make, it's just such a performance thing that
it feels kind of cheesy. But so I'm curious, how did you do with the role plays on the mission where you have to pretend you're an investigator?
Oh, dude. Well, it was really easy for me to kind of get out of doing that poorly because we didn't speak Spanish well enough there. And I remember I didn't have very much language. And I remember I made everybody laugh in there because I was next to my companion. We didn't have very much language, and we learned that thing about vi una columna de luz, like the thing about Joseph Smith seeing the thing.
Yeah.
And it ends up like, this is my beloved son, hear him. And I didn't know what to say. And I was sitting there and we couldn't talk well enough because the only time I ever did a role play was in Spanish and we didn't speak well enough yet. And so they just like looked at me and they talked to me, and I just turned to my companion and I said, este es mi compañero amado, escúchalo. You know, and I passed it off to him just using the few words that I learned because we had to memorize that. This is my beloved son, hear him. So to get out of it, I just said, este es mi compañero amado, escúchalo.
See, I was the same way, and we tried to. They tried to make us do it like just as companionships, actually out in the mission field. And I remember,
kept doing it. You kept practicing.
We were supposed to, and I remember.
That was just gone after the MTC.
See, when I got to Brazil, my first companion was one of the APs, and he like divided the APs. One of them went with me, and one of them went with a treble missionary. I was brand new, and my companion, nice guy, he American dude. He kept like trying to get me to do this role play thing, and finally I just looked and I was like, I'm not doing this. I can't. Like, this is pretend. Okay, it's pretend because I know the reactions you're gonna have. You're gonna be like, let's practice. You asked me to be baptized, and I say no, and then you say, well, please, and then I say, okay, why? Anyway, it's
so I'm like you. I'm hardcore like that. We're maybe hardcore for life. Like, I mean, I even get the points like my girlfriend will like say, tell me, like she's going out of town tomorrow. So tell me you miss me. I'm like, well, now I can't. Now I can't say it. I would have said it. But now I can't say it because you told me to say it.
Yeah, no, that's I've had that conversation. I'm like, why would you want me to say that? Because like, how could that possibly feel sincere?
Exactly. And I guess we'll get pedantic about that. But these guys have this way of being that just drives me bonkers. I mean, anybody starts talking or acting like that, and it drives me crazy. And in both the cases, the actual words they say, Jackson, Petrie, and McClellan, they talk about a lot of stuff that is kind of some of the arguments that I make that I try to reconcile or understand religion through. And they say a lot of stuff that I totally agree with and understand and see what they're saying. And then they just also use it and push it. And I think feel like they have all the answers, and they've all definitely got a political activistic angle that they're using to try to persuade and change other people.
So in my talk, I'm going to argue that no university can pursue both. Individuals can in their own lives, but a university needs to have a central mission, and it has to be either truth or social justice. It can't be both. And so I'm going to argue that we need a schism. We need our universities to clearly declare which way you're going. You can go either way, it's a free country, but you got to go one way or the other. And you have to be explicit about it, advertise that, and then students can choose which kind of university to go to. So here's why I believe that such a radical course, such a radical separation is actually needed. So in my talk, I'm going to make 8 points. The first...
but of course, being good postmodernists, they would claim that we can't help but be doing that too. That's all everything is. But yeah, I remember when Jackson put this one up, I said, well, why don't I'm gonna have a Mormon faith crisis for Lent. I think this galaxy brain idea.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm doing a practice of a faith that I don't ascribe to give up a faith that I claim to ascribe to for a month. I don't.
Yeah, and I said, well, why not do a Mormon faith crisis for Rumspringa? Like give it 2 years. Or how about a Mormon faith crisis for 40 years in the desert? Give it 40 years. You know, like
I guess if you're this Divinity Skool guy, you have to pretend to be religious. Oh, you have to pretend to be like Christian religious. You were definitely religious.
Or then go about asking other people to join you in practicing to not be religious. Like that's not got some sort of underhanded, sneaky thing about it. But look at this. I don't know if this is because of our criticism or others, but if you click on the link now, that's what it says.
It wasn't just us. He got a decent amount of pushback from that because, you know, you get I don't care if somebody tries to trivialize my experience of leaving the church. I don't really like it. Who cares? But a lot of ex-Mormons, they'll jump on that, like, oh, I can be a victim right now thing, and Jackson made me a victim or whatever.
And then the Mormons will jump on it saying, what are you doing? Like, why is it, this wouldn't be helpful for anybody. There's not like a single believing Mormon who'd think that would be a good idea to help reestablish.
It's also just impractical. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
Like you can't like fabricate okay, I'm going to not believe in Mormonism for a month, then I'll go back to believing in it. That's just not how your brain works. And the fact that, like, I mean, if that's something that he can do, then it's it sort of just goes to show that he sincerely doesn't believe in Mormonism.
You're correct, sir.
Yeah. So we pushed back on that, and we got in a big internet back and forth, and he got to name calling and all that stuff, and we got to a point where we were questioning the rigor and how difficult it was to get into divinity schools, because they like to say I went to Exeter. I mean, this guy went to Exeter Divinity School. He repeats often, like, I went to Harvard Divinity School. This guy repeats often, I went to Yale Divinity School. And you don't have to search very far, not to throw shade at it, because I still think they're smart people. This is the deal. I'm anti-credentialist guy. I don't give a crap what your credentials are. I'll be able to kind of pick out how smart you are and be able to tell if like you're well read or know more about a subject than I do. Like Flip doesn't have credentials. I have some credentials. I do not believe for a millisecond that I'm smarter than Flip on a million different things. And I just don't.
He's like a human encyclopedia. He just
exactly
shit out of nothing.
And I think each one of these guys are actually extremely smart guys. And that's one of the strange. Out of everybody we look at and tease and talk crap about, they're some of the smartest. But I wish they were using those smarts for something else. Like, I really do.
Well, spoiler alert for later on in this episode: Dan McClellan is definitely not anti-credentialist.
Yeah. None of them are.
He appeals to his own authority constantly.
I know. And then anybody else, he'll talk about if they're a serious thinker, or even if somebody's going outside their lane, even though he'll go outside their lane, he thinks Jordan Peterson should stay in his lane like so many of these credentialists do, even though he'll go way out of his lane. Or, I hate to break it to you, Dan McClellan, I know that like your PhD included stuff about cognitive science, but that doesn't mean you're a cognitive scientist. You know, I hate to break that to you. if you're going to be that sort of credentialist. But me, as somebody who's not that kind of credentialist, thinks that you can make points about cognitive science. Anyway, this guy's probably the most humble of the three of them. Like, I don't think he's like overly arrogant, but he's really kind of working and pushing queer theory into stuff. And he definitely gets all Foucauldian, and definitely gets one of the things they all do is they get Foucauldian and Derridian in their arguments. They look at the history of stuff and say, well, the history was actually like this, and the history is actually like that, and the history is actually like that. So who's to say what it needs to be now? That's the Foucault thing. That's the Foucault genealogy, and they're all doing the Foucault genealogy constantly. And that's basically that's how you knead the dough or whatever. That's how to get it so it's flexible, so you can maybe start molding it now. You know,
isn't that just the synopsis of Civilizations and Madness?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's all the Foucault stuff. I mean, he even lays it out in how to do his he calls it his genealogies. Of all you do is go and like do this gish gallop of, I keep saying gish gallop, but I mean, it's kind of just like a fire hose. That's a better word, a fire hose of history. If you wanted to even go check all the things, you have to go check things and look at them. They just like fire them off about all these weird esoteric things through history, because they're some sort of expert who spent some time reading each one of those things. You're just going to have to take their word for it, or the thing that they're firing off. But in the Foucault situation, very frequently you go and look at it and you see that they kind of altered it. He kind of altered what he's describing there for his own purposes. And then Foucault later openly admitted, like I said, these guys constantly openly admit they do. He's like, yeah, that's what I did. That's part of all of history, is a manipulation to what you view as, and I can do that too. And so when they get questioned on if their history is exactly right or not, I bet you Dan, with some of the stuff he says about the Bible or whatever, is probably more rigorous than how Foucault talked about history. But they're still doing the same thing. They're still doing I'm going to make you just rethink everything you ever thought about what this thing was or the origins of it. And I want you to forget what the origins of it are, or take the origins of it are if it's useful to me. You know, you get off your originalism unless I like the originalism. Then I'll go to then I'll appeal to the originalism. And then it's all just to say, so who's to say what it can and should be or will be going forward? And maybe I should be the one choosing it. So if you see, like, he's got a bunch of queer polygamy, you know, they try to liken the polygamy and that sort of stuff to being part of the queer community. And that some of the stuff about, since Mormons believe that you had an essence before having a body, that there's kind of like room for trans queer stuff there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Like that. So I recognize Blair Ostler as a name.
Yeah, I recognize that name too.
I've seen him on Twitter. He's got some funny things. He had this something about, it was during Pride Month, and it was like he's one of those guys that says he's Mormon, but really doesn't seem Mormon at
Oh,
all.
I know who it is now.
And he had that big long thing about how no, stay, don't leave us or whatever. And everybody thought he was talking about like telling gay people to stay in the church, but he was just saying, you know, don't kill yourself.
Oh.
And he had to like it was one of the funniest things ever to find this guy that's like a well known as being like a Mormon guy said, "Oh no! I wasn't telling you to stay in the church. Please don't think I was trying to tell anyone to stay in what I claim to believe is the one true church." Like, what are you?
That would be bad. But we had in our the last one you, me, and Flip did, we pulled out that moment that like I was kind of say, like, I think they're doing this, they're kind of doing this, and then they just say it outright, and it just kind of blows your mind. But John Larson said in that last episode, like, stop leaving the church, stay in it and change it.
There were the people who came before me who were kicked out of the church and were darkened, who wrote books and they wrote blogs. And then there were people in my generation who came out and said, no, me, I'm leaving. I'm out. What we need is the next generation that will say, I'm staying, but fuck all your bullshit. We're done with temples. We're done with ordinances. We are going to live the gospel as defined by Jesus Christ. If they do that, that will move this movement to the next level. I can't do that. John DeLynn can't do that. Kara can't do it. And it's going to be hard. It was hard when I left the church in 2005. We took arrows. And those people who stand up in church and say, you're my people, you're my ward. I don't believe any of this bullshit, but I love you guys and I'm not going anywhere.
And I think these guys are all the essence, the epitome of that. And Kevin and I pulled that clip from the end of Salt Lake City Punk, where the whole thing's about, hey, you can't change it from the outside. You can do way more damage on the inside. Way.
Yeah, I was going to go to Harvard. It was obvious. I was going to be a lawyer and play in the goddamn system. And that was that. It was my old man. He knew. So what else could I do? I mean, there's no future in anarchy. I mean, let's face it. But when I was into it, there was never a thought of the future. I mean, we were certain that the world was going to end. But when it didn't, I had to do something. So fuck it. I could always be a litigator in New York and piss the shit out of the judges. I mean, that was me, a troublemaker, the future. The guy that was one of those guys that my parents so arrogantly saved the world for. So we could fuck it up. We could do a hell of a lot more damage in the system than outside of it. That was the final irony, I think. That, well, this. Fuck you if you're already thinking it. I guess when all was said and done, I was nothing more than a goddamn trendy-ass poser.
I wonder what a conversation between John Larson and Dan McClellan would look like, because I would love to mediate that and be like, I just want to talk about how John Larson said, if you remain in the church or whatever, then you are a bigot. If you want to not be a bigot, you have to leave. That's the only thing you can do. You got to quit your job at BYU. All of that. So I want to see what he says and what Dan McClellan would respond to, because they seem like they wouldn't really want to fight each other.
Well, that's what's really weird. I mean, I'd suggest watching the entire Under the Banner of Heaven review on their channel just to bathe in that strange cognitive dissonance of them being leftists and Mormons at the same time. And they're full leftists. He's a Democratic candidate for Senate. We're going to get to him, but they're trying to fit two things into a box that don't go into the same box so hard. And that same question you're having, it just breaks my brain. Like they're both trying to accuse Dustin Lance Black, the writer of Under the Banner of Heaven, of bigotry towards Mormons, and also show their allyship to his homosexuality at the same time.
I didn't realize he was gay.
Oh yeah, that's his whole thing.
I don't really know anything about him, is what I'm saying.
So he's the dude who initially did some documentary on Prop 8 around the time when the Prop 8 stuff went down. Oh. And he got a little bit famous for that documentary because it got a theater release. And then from there, he went on to be the writer of the Big Love Show. Oh. And the Big Love Show weirded me out so hard because by the end of it, it really was more like he was going on the Taylor Petrie side of stuff. Like he was saying, hey, polygamists. I was watching the whole show and you're kind of like thinking from this, especially in that time frame, from this feminist lens, that these women got to break away from this patriarch. Right? You're thinking that's the end of it. That's maybe what we're working towards here. You know what I mean? You're thinking that's the hero outcome. And no, it turns out what it gets towards pushing, and you can even hear interviews after the show of what the writers thought, that they got towards pushing them saying, hey, no, we're for all kinds of love. We're for polygamy love. And if we can be for your love, why can't you be for our love too? And the whole thing you thought was about this overly patriarchal religion being horrible to these women. And you just by the end of it, you just get the typical queer brain boggle, the queer theory brain boggle. They never make sense, but I guess that's the stated goal, right, Judith?
I think my beef with early Mormon polygamy was never that it's a weird kind of love. It's that it wasn't love at all.
We thought the point is like that's real patriarchy. You guys are
I know that's
talking
the
about
thing.
patriarchy.
If you want to get me to call something the patriarchy, it's early.
I will call that the
young
patriarchy.
Utah.
You guys have a way bad, like, what do they call it? Concept creep of calling everything patriarchy and thinking the entire essence of the universe is patriarchy. But no, but that is patriarchy. I'd call some of the Islamic systems patriarchy for sure. I'll join in on you.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah. But they got to the end of the show and it's completely, I promise, go listen to like some interviews of the final episode. And they're like, we wanted to show the polygamists that we're down with all these types of queer love too. Why can't you be down with our queer love? And you're like, what?
Dude, that is such a terrible move to it, because like the Mormon fundamentalist polygamy is not good.
Yeah,
and if you're trying to compare, like, see, we're okay with you doing this terrible thing. Why aren't you okay with us doing? Well, it's not a terrible thing. So stop comparing the two. You're making us look bad.
And I was watching the show and I liked the characters. I thought it was funny enough. It was interesting just watching and seeing like what must it really be like in a day-to-day level, not thinking just like everybody always thinks of the sexual relationships and that might be some benefit to the guy and enjoyable or whatever. But if you think of like the day-to-day of like keeping 3 households of wives and kids happy, like what a nightmare that might become. It got
worth the sex, like
yeah, it got funny and really wild to think about that. Like this would be a nightmare. This would be a nightmare.
Be getting sex every day. Like, look, I would give up on. I would do like once a month sex to not have that. If that were or the alternative.
You're getting griped at for not fulfilling the duties of 3 different women who you can't be there very much for because you're with the others, and then they also start infighting with each other's nightmare. That does not look fun at all.
That's just the inherent problem with like polyamory is that people are going to get jealous. And you ask them, they embrace the jealousy now. They're always like, yeah, of course we get jealous sometimes. All right, do what you want.
But anyway, because the show's pretty decent as far as that goes, you kind of start rooting for characters, you know what I mean? And so you get to this level, you're like thinking, this lady's going to break out. This lady's going to break out. Oh my gosh, this lady's going to break out. And it's going to be like some hero moment, you know? And nope.
It's like Winston embracing Big Brother.
Yeah, I was so confused, man.
But anyway. The lesson of the book isn't Big Brother is bad and Winston embraced him out of weakness.
Yeah.
It
broke him.
It turns out he was right. Big Brother was good.
Yeah. So then he's written on some other stuff, but now he got commissioned to write under the banner of heaven. And he's the one who called up Lindsay Hansen Park and other people to get consultation on this stuff and whatever. And he grew up Mormon. So, and that's kind of why they initially, in the very first episode of reviewing it, you see them come out and they're trying to run defense for it because the show is already getting backlash for being so weird and not quite seeming like actual Provo, Utah Mormonism. Yeah.
Oh, honey. I have to go. Do it there. Oh, in the name of Jesus Christ.
And they started trying to give this description using Roland Barthes and structuralism and post-structuralism to try to apologize for why Lance Black had to do things like pray a different way so it could signal to a larger population that this is prayer.
The prayer thing weirded me out because that's when they started talking about the signal versus the signifier, and
that's Roland Barthes.
Like it's gonna be, you're gonna be signaling to, if he gets down that way, it might signal to Mormons that he's praying that way, but it wouldn't signal to anybody else. And I was like, but he's on his fucking knees. Like it's not just that.
I think you could have done it just normal. And even the jarring experience of seeing the way like a Mormon does it to some other person, they'd be like, "That's weird that they do it that way," you know.
Well, and I haven't seen it. Does he pray out loud?
Yeah, he prays out loud. And
he's praying out loud.
Yeah.
Why does it even matter?
I think if he got down on his knees in the Mormon way and like folded his arms and started praying out loud, it would be perfectly I think it would even be better to seem awkward to the random viewer.
Yeah,
like,
it's different. It's like if you were showing, like, if your show is about Muslims and he goes to do the prayer thing and he doesn't take out his mat and he doesn't go completely, he just stands there like this. You'd be like, what the hell? They don't pray like that, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do they? Maybe they do. Like, it would just confuse the person you're trying to signal that he's praying to. If he gets down and bows his head, I know he's praying. I don't know much about Islam, but I know he's praying.
So the only reason they're making that whole thing is because, like, in the very first review they did of it, they're trying to be friends and allies, and they're trying to. I can play with this. I can go with this. We're also way into self-lashing and talking about how possibly racist and whatever the Mormons were. We're into this. We're into this. By the end of it, they weren't having it. By the 5th episode, they're just like, this is bigotry towards Mormonism. And it's just like when the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were Islamophobic against the Islamophobes around the year 2000. And this is just another version of that, because Krakauer's book came out at the same time. And these guys are trying to turn the violence of the state against the Mormons. And in all the realms we look at, it's just such a crisscrossing of two worlds that, like, to me, I felt like I was in a car and the car was zipping around corners. And I'm getting zinged to this side, zinged to this side.
It does legitimately. I listened to the first, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes of this, and it legitimately sounds like it's just they're running apologetics for Dustin Lance Black, and that's
yeah.
Well,
they did
if
the
you
thing.
take it, blah blah blah. If you understand the signal versus a signifier, you're signaling to this person, dude. Just
if somebody stops before they're going to try to explain something away to you and give you a 45-minute lecture on structuralism.
Hang on a second. Hang on.
Just
I'm
stop.
gonna have to read
You're
you a
listening.
few chapters of Derrida, and
You're
then I'll
listening
be
to-
able to explain to you why that this prayer scene makes sense.
You're listening to pedantry. That's what you're listening to. Not pedantry. I was going to say you're listening to sophistry. Well, it's pedantry and sophistry. This kind of sets the case, because this is Petrie, and this is like 2-3 years ago, and he's talking about postmodernism and Mormonism and how the Divinity Schools play into it and that stuff. Should I double speed it or not? I'll
Give it a
1.5
shot.
speed it.
I
I'll
don't know this
1.5
guy,
speed.
so I don't know how fast he goes.
That story of the loss of faith is maybe also one that we recognize that some of us might have experienced. So in Mormon contexts, this conflict between modernism and fundamentalism has played itself out in a number of different ways. But I want to turn to a couple of different figures here that come out of the 1930s and really are active up through the 1960s as well, Heber Snell and Sidney B. Sperry. And I'm drawn to these two figures for a couple of reasons. First of all, they are a part of the first wave of LDS students to go off to study at Divinity School, which is what I also did as well.
So he's looking at the first Divinity School people to start influencing the Mormon church. And we got Flip.
Here comes the new challenger.
Yep. And just
What's
to
going
show
on?
how non-stop this shit is, I turn on my laptop, Facebook, top thing, NPR. Gordita says it was interesting to explore toxic masculinity as a perpetrator instead of an object. And that the goal brought up a lot of questions. The headline, why it matters that Danae Guerrera is taking on Richard III. And so there's a black actress who's playing Richard III, and they're talking about how, isn't this fascinating? And oh my God, I just can't. It's nonstop. It's just it's one of the things that cracks me up is when people people you listen to now where they pretend like, oh, that it's just reactionaries. People are just reacting. They don't even know what's going on. Like, no, it is relentless. It is a fire hose of this shit constantly.
That fire hose is the exact word Chris just used. So.
Yeah. we're just doing what's the word that Dan likes to use? Rhetorical
paraphylaxis was what it was.
Paraphylaxis, yeah.
Paraphylaxis.
Yeah, it's because we're trying to guard off of well, I think that's just his word for white fragility.
It must be. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a random quote. I just found some quotes. Let's just see if it's something evil and stupid. When you have the woman essentially speaking to another woman who is playing a man, there's something quite interesting, O'Hara said, because when you see the relief of all the men standing around doing absolutely nothing but enabling this person, it becomes sort of shockingly realistic in today's world.
Wow.
Yep. Because you see, toxic masculinity exists, which is to say that masculinity is toxic. There's no such thing as masculinity that isn't toxic, according to these people. And then there's everyone else is an object. There's people who do toxic masculinity, and then there are objects. They have simplified the world for us. Isn't that nice of them? Good thing that we don't have religion anymore telling us.
That's one of the things that's frustrating, because we've already got into kind of describing a little bit of of who we're going to look at from these Divinity Skool people. And a lot of the stuff that they do is they drop things like toxic masculinity as a priori, like already accepted, just a real thing. And so that we don't even have to start with that stuff. We can just drop that stuff in. I mean, I hear them drop it in all over the place.
One of the most, like, it's such an evil concept. And yet, and it's also, it's so empty.
Yeah. It's just not very rigorous at all either.
Yeah,
and
no,
I'm sure these guys can argue until they're blue in the face about it.
It allows them to just make a glossary entry, and that way all of their bigotry is justified because of the existence of that glossary entry. They decided there's this thing called toxic masculinity, and it justifies their hate. Bada bing, bada boom. There you go.
It's that meme that my enemies are ontologically evil, so all action against them is justified.
That's really, because Dan McClellan has all these things about why we need to give credence and listen to whatever arguments from anybody that's of the oppressor group, but he will not and does not believe that he needs to extend any of that charity to the oppressor group.
But he explicitly says that. It's not even like he's dancing around that. That one I sent earlier is he straight up says that.
Yeah. It's like I mean, Hitler's last night on Earth, he just spent all night writing, and it was like this big journal entry where basically he just went, "Why did you make me do this?" It literally was that. He's like, "Darn it, you evil Western capitalists and you awful Marxists, and above all, you Zionists.
You want to know what?
You made me do this."
If you want to listen to it, I'll send it to you. But Thaddeus Russell did like a whole hour kind of backing the thing of saying liberals backed him into a corner and put him into the hostage situation. So that's more. Thaddeus Russell's not the worst postmodernist, but he's still a postmodernist and he's still doing everything. But so this guy, this dude Petrie that we're listening to, you might have seen him before. He's the least arrogant of the three of them that we're looking at, but he's the guy who kind of tries to weave in all these queer theory ideas into Mormonism and definitely gets Foucauldian. He has this stuff about saying that polygamy and polyamory is kind of like a queer love, and then like the ideas of being pre-existence before you have a body. That's all sorts of room and space for queer thinking. But this is him talking about how the Mormon church started sending people off who went to divinity schools and how they started bringing back and helping the church ratchet itself leftward, I'd say.
My understanding of this, I think I'm correct, that there's a first generation that goes off in the 1930s, and they're actually sponsored by the church. The church sends about a dozen or so young men to study at Chicago Divinity School, which was one of the top divinity schools, and it still is, of course. The second wave happens in the 1970s of Latter-day Saints. Now, they are not sponsored by the church to go off and study, but there's a kind of resurging interest that happens there. And Sunstone comes out of that wave in some respects. Many of the founders of Sunstone were people who went off to study at divinity schools in the 1970s. My wave is what I think is the third wave, is going on from the late 90s, early 2000s. There was
the woke wave.
The third is always where it gets bad. Third wave
Stop third wave.
The Third Reich was the worst Reich.
Yeah, we need this T-shirt that says "Stop the third one." Stop the third thing.
If it's two ways you don't succeed, then just fucking give up.
Who went off to study at divinity school and are now working in the field, and we're sort of the underachievers. We haven't really done much, so we'll see what happens. Okay.
Yeah.
But the University of Chicago's Divinity School was a liberal school at the time, and that's the reason that Mormons were allowed in, because of course the fundamentalist schools did not accept Mormons and would not accept Mormons, but the more ecumenical and open and progressive Protestants would accept Mormons to come and study. So that's how they ended up there. These Latter-day Saints were tasked to go off and learn these things, and then to bring back the knowledge that they had to teach at the church's educational system, the early CES, and at BYU and so forth, and to bring this knowledge from these great schools back to Latter-day Saints here. But different students had different reactions to it. There are a bunch of the young Latter-day Saints who were following the modernists and really decrying all of the Latter-day Saints who were becoming modernists. But others, like Russell Swenson, returned comfortably as a modernist to BYU, taught there for years, and described the great positive benefits that the Chicago movement had brought to the church's curriculum and educational institutions.
So yeah, there's back and forth, the people coming out of it.
And so when you reject fundamentalism, you simply reject the tradition altogether. We might also say maybe the modernist arguments aren't that good, and that people reject the modernist arguments as they're rejecting Mormonism itself. That is, maybe the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham are a little bit, the modernist explanations for those aren't that good. And if you don't accept the fundamentalist explanation of those, then you don't accept the tradition at all. And I think we may have to contend with that issue a little bit as well. Modernist Mormons who might want to relativize the historicity of the Book of Mormon might have less tools in their toolkit for doing so than do biblical scholars who are able to accept a kind of more messy history of authorship and historicity of the texts than modernist Mormons. We may also say maybe we're asking too much of people to give up a lot to while accepting a kind of moderate faith or maybe a post-belief Mormonism. You know, it's hard to be a Mormon. It's hard to live to the standards, and maybe that's another reason that people just don't find the modernist tradition all that compelling themselves. So I thought that I would make all of this a little bit more complicated, but in a really superficial way. Okay, so indulge me a little bit to talk about this other trend here of postmodernism. That is the tradition which comes to reject many of the claims of the Enlightenment, or at least is critical in some ways of the Enlightenment. Okay, what in the heck is postmodernism? The term we hear, it's often used as an insult. Okay, we don't know what it means. Okay, and part of the reason we don't know what it means is because there is no single definition of it.
Used as an insult. When it's not used as an insult.
The conservatives will say that you're doing your postmodernism, but that's not. I don't think it's insulting. It's just saying.
Say the word as just mean what it is, or to be critical of it, then they just assume it's an insult. But that's the thing. Like, it's. I mean, because you talk about it all the time. Like, it's Schrodinger's theology or whatever. But like, yeah, like, you know, if I say up front, I'm a critical of feminism, and then I give a definition of patriarchy, they tell me that I don't know what it means. But if I'm in a gender studies class and I give the exact same definition, I'm given an A because I said it right.
It's only an insult in that repressive tolerance way that if you don't agree with us, you're being violent.
If I use the word in anything but an affirming, approving way, it's just an insult. Yeah,
we also
the exact same thing John Larson did when he said woke isn't a word, just an insult. You know, it's the exact same thing. It's like, no, it's your word. The people you call woke are the people who gave us the word.
Yeah. And before starting, I was saying that, like, these guys, one of the hard things about it is, like, I know you can't do the Rappaport's rules or the Steel Manning where you could recite to them their beliefs as they would agree to it, because everything is so heavily over explained and over, you know, their post-structuralist or Derridian ways of messing with definitions and all that sort of deal, that you would never land on something that they would ultimately agree with unless you were in agreement with them. And if you tried to say it, but what you're pointing out there too is not only would they not agree, but your disagreeing description of it is violence on some level.
I'm interested to see.
I remember when we were kids in the playground and people would just be fucking postmodernists.
I'm interested to see.
I grew up in Utah all the time. I grew up in 1980s Utah, and they said you effing postmodernist all the time, man.
Heavenly Father, darn you.
Heavenly Father, darn. That's
how they spoke in 80s Utah. Thank Heavenly Father. No, I'm excited to hear what his definition of postmodernism is, because he's saying, like, oh, nobody even knows what it is. I'm like, well, that's kind of by design. I don't really want you to know. It's obscure as a feature.
It's built into it that nobody can actually say what anything is ever. So, okay.
Rejects essentialist definitions in itself, and so therefore you can't even define it. Okay. I think that we can maybe say a few
just said
things
it can't be
about
defined. Thank you.
Yeah, he says, I think we can maybe say a few things about it.
Nobody knows anything about this undefinable thing. Well, no shit.
It rejects notions of
it's their version of the Holy Ghost. Like, that's things I realize. Like, they have so many Holy Ghosts that, like, it's essential to their belief. They will invoke it as an answer to anything. Yeah, but what is it? Where is it? How can you find it? Is there a test for it? Nope.
This is the theory of heads I win, tails you lose.
Exactly.
Single objective truth. The binaries that structure many ideas about, say, race or gender, or the idea of a stable self, or the notion of a nation altogether, or the notion of human nature. Okay? These are all things that postmodernists spend a lot of time thinking about. And instead, they emphasize values like plurality, fragmentation, contingency, construction of human knowledge and experiences, and so on. Okay, is that clear? Everybody knows what postmodernism is? Okay, perfect.
No.
So
we all know that we don't.
The categories of modernity, like religion, the self, sexuality, gender, and so on, we often take these as simply self-evident. We know exactly what we mean when we say male or female, or what the self is, right? But postmodernists are really trying to complicate these ideas. And part of the reason why is that there's a kind of dual legacy to modernity. On the one hand, it gives us the modern university. It gives us iPhones. It gives us all kinds of wonderful things. The ways that we structure our knowledge and the ways that universities are organized around the psychology and sociology and economics and so on, these all emerge out of Enlightenment thinking. On the other hand, if you trace back the histories of a lot of these disciplines, they have somewhat ugly, if not complicated, histories.
And that ugly and complicated history is the only one that I've seen Dan McClellan point at whenever he's talking about Enlightenment, whatever. Or he uses in that colonialism way that the only thing we were ever doing with any of that stuff was trying to funnel other people into our imperialist needs.
Yeah, racism and colonialism is always like the fault of whatever system I'm wanting to shit on today. It's always, right now it's Enlightenment, right? Modernism. usually it's capitalism and patriarchy, but it's always the fault of whatever we're in right now. Before this, racism and oppression just didn't exist.
That's science.
half of Flip's comments on NPR articles is the world started today.
The bias, that scientific bias, man. That's really their point of view. Is like if people are actually doing science, that science is biased. Like the science bias, essentialism. So they get angry at the word essentialism.
Positions 100 years ago were things like racial science, eugenics, the psychological cure for homosexuality, which many of these, not to say that they don't exist anymore, they still exist. We're still living with these, but these were the parts of why psychology was invented, right? These are why economics were invented, and they often have these kind of really ugly pasts. So postmodernists are trying to explore and uncover some of these aspects of modernity that we might
to discredit it, to
does
discredit
he think
all
that,
of it.
So does he think that it was postmodernism that informed us that we need to stop like doing electroshock and vomit aversion therapy to young gay men?
You're exactly right, and I've seen huge debates on that exact subject, and usually the informed modernist will say, no, in most of these cases, it was the scientific process itself and the modernists themselves who got on top of it being wrong. You didn't need a postmodern critical eye to get out of the bad situation.
Yeah, because you almost need to believe in some sort of an objective truth or objective morality to say that that's wrong, or to say that even slavery is wrong. And postmodernism just all out rejects the idea of any type of objective morality. So if I were to say that like it's wrong to make a guy vomit until he's no longer sexual, just to try to cure him of being gay, they'd be like, well, who's to say what's wrong ever?
Yeah.
Can queer theory offer a criticism of transorbital lobotomies?
Yeah. If you want to see an argument about it, it was Christy Winters versus King Crocoduck. We pointed out last time, but they had this large argument where she said that you needed the critical feminist eye or this race eye to get on top of some certain atrocities that had been done by science. And King Crocoduck was able to talk about the specific instances where, no, it was actually the modernists and the scientists themselves that got on top of correcting the situation. And liberalism has that incrementalism that does get better. And no, we never needed you guys to help. You make it all worse. You're like kids in the kitchen.
Want to be critical of, as opposed to simply accepting as this wonderful bestowal of rationality that we think that we got. So what does this look like in Mormonism? How has postmodernism affected Mormon thinking? Well, not too much, but the first article is by Massimo Introvigne, The Book of Mormon Wars, a non-Mormon perspective, that came out in 1996. Introvigne is a non-Mormon scholar, and he observes something that he takes to be kind of curious. He says, there's something going on between the secularists and the Mormon apologists that I find interesting. The secularists are adopting all of these kind of old-fashioned Enlightenment paradigms for history, and the apologists are adopting all of these postmodern kind of cutting edge.
This is 96, and I've just barely started noticing this is 20 years after it in 2016, 17, 18, where I started saying like it's John Larson and John Lynn who still think like they're holding on to the hardcore science university, and that's what the university still is. They don't realize the carpet was pulled right out from under them. They make these appeals, like we were just talking earlier, we were watching Nuance Ho and this guy earlier, and they were talking about deconstruction, which that word deconstruction comes from postmodernism, it comes from Derrida, and it doesn't make sense the way the ex-Mormons use it, but they've translated it into this liberalese, they've translated it into empiricism. An empirical view of the Mormon church is a deconstruction, but an actual postmodern deconstruction would not be anything like that. Dan McClellan and these Divinity Skool guys, these guys actually know how to do the deconstruction. And that's so mind-boggling about the situation, because the guys talking about deconstruction aren't the ones doing it, but the ones deconstructing are the ones who understand it, and they're inside the house. The call's coming from inside the house.
You know, most people, that's used a lot in ex-Mormondom, the word deconstruction. A lot of people don't really know much about it. Like, I've even heard a conversation with my wife where she mentioned something about like, oh yeah, that's what it was like, you know, deconstructing Mormonism. And I was like, please don't use that word. I don't like that word. But she's obviously not, you know.
A proper trained linguist like Dan McClellan would say, well, it's taken on a meaning of its own as it has evolved, and it has nothing to do with its original meaning. But the original meaning of deconstruction was far more along those lines of structuralism. It was like superstructuralism. They call it post-structuralism, but that sounds like it's an answer to structuralism, where it's not like really like a contradiction to structuralism. It's just saying words are shifty, and the meaning of the words shift so much you almost can't even talk and communicate with each other, because you can never really point. Here's the quick definition of it. Now that you listen to that description of signifier and signified, the real kind of definition of what Derrida and post-structuralism is there is no signifier.
Happens when we introduce additional layers of signification. For example, the word lion signifies a particular animal, but on another level, the lion can signify another meaning, like courage, nobility, or MGM Studios. Here is Saussure's sign. The sound of the word lion is the signifier, and the concept of the animal lion is the signified. The two together form the sign lion. Let's turn this on its side and redraw it slightly, and we'll put a label for the whole box or the whole sign. On another level, this whole sign is a signifier for something else, say, a king. We now have two nested signs, with one taking the role of signifier in the other. This diagram is adapted from one drawn by the literary critic Roland Barthes. And while Barthes focused on this two-term system, later critics extended it further, noting that these boxes could be nested infinitely. Radical post-structuralism suggests that the chain of signification has no end. Language never points to a concrete signified outside the chain that would anchor it in an external reality. Instead, language only ever points at additional layers of language further down the chain.
You can't point at a specific perfectly. He had this thing where he said in his classes that if I give you a signifier, if any of you bring me a signified of the signifier, you will get an A for the class. And it was his little sophistry of a thing of saying, like, you could never actually bring your cat and tell me this is your cat, you know? And
hey,
go ahead.
How did this take hold? Like, because I can see as like as a thought experiment, like, let's play with this for a semester. But then,
yeah,
you know, it's, I don't know how to say it other than it's like the Klingon problem in Star Trek, where it's like a society that's built on what Klingons value. Like, how did they ever get into space? How did they build a canoe, let alone a spaceship, right? And then like this thing where it's like, if words don't mean anything and no one knows what anybody's saying, how the hell did we even get here?
So I think it's sophistry.
Yes.
I think this all takes hold through sophistry, because I was talking to my wife about this earlier. One of my favorite, all of my favorite authors, there's not a lot that Ayn Rand and Dostoevsky have in common, but one thing they have in common is that in every one of their books, there's some dinner party. And at this dinner party, there's two types of people. There's the sophist, who uses all that flowery language and convinces everyone that he's smart. And then there's the followers who surround him and suck his dick and just say like, oh yeah, me too. It's intelligence signaling. And they're like, yeah, I totally get this. I totally get this. I'm there too.
Yeah, it's a signal. It's a signal.
You go and you start like introducing a new idea that sounds crazy that only a really, really smart person could believe in. That's how postmodernism takes place. That's how you say, how do you even know that the sky is blue? How do you know this isn't a simulation? How can you trust any of your senses? And it's, for most people on your own, it's a fun little thought experiment. But when you're in a big group where the leader of that group, the sophist, is telling you that no, this is a big deal, then everybody's like, yep.
I've got the certification. I've got the PhD on my wall that says it's a big deal. But the thing about it too is that Mormons, you got it all backwards once again. Like, your ex-Mormons are calling deconstruction empiricism, and your Mormons are actually using deconstruction. And you gotta listen, because if Flip has the question like, why is this stuff useful? I would say like go deep with Dan, like go all the way through their complaints about Under the Banner of Heaven, or the way they reframe things. They're using deconstruction. So here's one of the way it gets really useful for apologists. And I saw a while back, Jonathan and I were both looking at this. We're like, this gets really useful for typical apologists. So you have somebody who's trying to be an apologist for how the Book of Mormon got translated, right? So you start saying, well, what's translated? We're in this world of the noumenon, where you have all these things that are just images and phenomenological images that just appear before your eyes. And then how do you describe those things that appear before your eyes? And what's the word you're saying to the thing that appears before your eyes? And so what's a translation? And so what do you write down in that translation? When you're talking about horses, what kind of horse are you talking about? A horse? Is the horse a thing? But this is just people in an olden time trying to describe a thing and put it on a piece of paper. And then there's that word. What does that word signify? They put that word on the thing. Does that word actually mean the thing, or is it? You see how that gets useful for apologists? Way useful for apologists.
You remember a Jew, the great Jew problem?
Yeah,
in the Book
exactly.
of Mormon, the character says a Jew, and it's you're right. it's a postmodernist deconstruction that makes that make sense.
Yep. So now you see where it is useful. So it's not useful for the ex-Mormons, who the ex-Mormons are trying to be all supersonic empiricism. Although this is the first thing I said when I went on to the Midnight Mormons, is it's all logical positivism for the ex-Mormons, but then they go and talk to a critical race theorist or a queer theorist, and they're suddenly, hey, we can get postmodern as we need to. We can play with whatever definition or whatever phenomenology. We don't need to be empiricists. We don't need to be empiricists here because it's mean to be empiricists here. Science is mean here. But if it's going against the Mormons, science is jolly good, all empiricism. And so you see now how it's like all getting scrambled up, and why it's useful for the apologists and not useful for the ex-Mormon deconstructors. Oh, using that word drives me crazy. How many times did they say it on Nuance Ho today? It drives me so nuts.
Right when I was deconstructing Mormonism, and that made me feel very sad.
Being able to deconstruct is learning how to deconstruct. And in order to do that,
With that we talk about with deconstruction, all of it just has to all inner work, and it kind of is all just based around honesty.
yeah, no, radical honesty has to precede the deconstruction process, because if you aren't going to be honest, what are you even doing kidding yourself that you're going to deconstruct? The reason why I bring this whole topic up with them is that in the deconstruction process, there are going to be so many construction ends. Radical honesty, as I've talked to people who've deconstructed, and with my experience as well, as I've talked to people who've deconstructed, and the fact that us, like the people who have deconstructed, the people who have left.
Brandon, think of all the people I know that they didn't deconstruct the church. They just left when they were teenagers.
When you deconstruct, I mean, I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I don't really deconstructing that point of view, that that belief system that you had non-consensually pumped into your mind, drip, drip, drip every Sunday.
Whether it's like a mentor or a friend or somebody who's also deconstructing, whether it's a really imprint or like an online community, because when you're first deconstructing and waking up to, I'm just going to be blunt, all of the ways that you were systematically lied to day in, day out.
Because that's not because I popped into it like in the middle, like it was a live show, and then somebody linked to it, and I'm like, well, let's see it, and like it was like a magic trick where the first word I heard was just like deconstructed Mormonism. I'm like, oh my God, we're right back where we were. So we're not reviewing that thing because she said something in that episode today that, like, I mean, every time it's come up, I've asked people, and obviously I don't have an answer, but she said, society is just made up. She's like, newsflash. She was, I don't know if you saw. Newsflash, society is just made up. And whenever I hear this, I always ask the same question: by whom, when, why, and how?
Yeah,
there's no answer to that, obviously. Because if you think about it for any amount of time, it falls apart. Yeah. It's not even two questions deep that falls apart. It's one question deep that it falls apart. Who made society up?
Yep. And so
well, I learned from
why are we the only ones in the middle of this? Like, where's the 3,000 other people seeing?
I don't know, man. I learned from Vosh that circular definitions are totally acceptable when he was trying to answer the "what is a woman" question. I expected some better sophistry out of him, but he just essentially said, no, circular definitions are totally acceptable.
Then I saw some postmoderns try to say, well, the word female is exactly the same thing as woman. So when you say adult human female, you've done the circular argument again. You're like, no, there's a different definition for that. And but I saw this other thing from Steve Stewart Williams. Maybe I'll post it right now. I'll post it here, Chris, of this thing of like, they can start charting out, like when they talk about time, a general chart of the average person across many different people. Like if you're saying way in the future, maybe coming soon, later, these kind of like vague words of time that you can chart what people think, amount of time people think that mean. And there's like a range of time that is. So it's like, it's real. It's like, there's a real definition of it. Gosh. So you can also think about it this other way that apologists start using these philosophers, these phenomenologists like Husserl or Heidegger, who are kind of proto postmodernists and that definitely got there. But you have Bednar, who says there's no gay members in the church. And then what are you saying? There's a gay members? That's empirically true. And then they go, wait. Are you are what you are, or are you are what you do? And they start using they start doing the sophistry of that stuff, and save Bednar that way. And the empirical deconstructors, that breaks my brain, the go, no, there's obviously empirically, people. And so when we got into an argument last week with Dan McClellan. He was telling us that critical race theory is data driven. I guarantee you he's going to have he's going to try to have a semantic argument. Like if we actually got him down in front of us, he'd have a semantic argument of why that's true.
You think he would? Because he seems to, like, anytime a semantic argument would be a good move, he just blocks people.
Yeah. But he would say something like, there is data that most Black people say that they've had a racist experience in their life. Data. And you go, well, yeah, that's okay, first off, that might be Pew Research, but there's no critical race theorists on earth doing detailed methodological quantitative data inside of critical race theory. Or qualitative, not with any sort of methodology. None of them do that. They just make philosophical assertions. None of them do that data. That's not data, Dan McClellan.
Does he, this is what, with a guy like Dan McClellan in that situation, and I really wonder, because if you read the basics of critical race theory, or even a summary, they begin with their conclusions. They're not shy about it. They start out by saying everything is racist. The definition of sophistry. Yeah. That is sophistry. Yeah. And so, like, why does he even think data enters into it? It doesn't. It literally doesn't enter it according to critical race theorists. They data, not only that, and they work there. They have theorized out that data itself is part of the white Western empiricism.
Yeah, doesn't
he decries so much?
Racist. Yeah, isn't data completely spit in the face of standpoint epistemology? Like if
yes.
Well, and standpoint epistemology doesn't carry through because if a white person says something, like if a white person says I have experienced racism in my life, that they run into a problem there, but then they have that fixed by just changing the definition of racism to where they can say, well, definitionally, you actually can't experience racism, only perpetrate it.
In the Bay Area in San Francisco, where in order to no longer perpetuate racist stereotypes, they are no longer showing images of suspected criminals from security camera footage. Like they're not, like no more, this is our suspect, keep an eye out for this
Michael
guy.
Scott. It's just I'm gonna shout that in every episode we have. This is Michael Scott getting angry at the black guy for being the one that had committed the crime because he's trying to show how progressive he is. Why didn't you think of me when you committed that crime? And like I was trying to show everyone how damn progressive I am, but it turns out the black guy did commit the crime in this instance. And
there's so much to that. I mean, we've shared 100 million stories between us about that stuff going back 10 years now. And one of the things about it is, I mean, we haven't even gotten to Dan yet. I mean, I guess it'll all come up as we get going, but I don't know. This guy's, I don't know how much more there's here. I know at one point he calls himself a good Foucauldian and all that sorts of stuff. So they admit as they go that they are postmodernists. Sometimes you have to wait and sniff out and hear them talking about their postmodernism to see if they're really fully there. Dan McClellan never fully says he does, but he drops all the terminology that that he comes right out of that school.
If he doesn't call the age of consent an arbitrary social construct, then he's not a very good Foucauldian.
There seems to be like this, there's like this weird, I don't know, I'm making a line here, but like, so people who are brand new to Marxism are happy to say they're communists. And then there's the people who know a bit more and they are sneaky and they will, like, you'll have to drag it out of them. Well, yeah, I'm a communist. And then you get all the way to the Zizeks, and but yeah, like I don't know.
There's always this level. I even got to ask a commie one time who hid the ball from us forever on one of these Facebook pages, and I finally said, "Why don't you guys just admit you're Marxist? Look, it's here, and he finally did say, "Okay, yeah, we're Marxist." You go, what was with hiding the ball? Jared and I started this whole entire thing, Flip, with talking about not hiding the ball about what we are, and like when I said when I went on the Midnight Mormons and all that stuff, that right off the bat. I tell people that I'm able to kind of understand and even play with these phenomenological arguments. I'll even let them go. Peterson kind of does it on that pragmatic level. And I play with it to a level. Peterson will never tell you, and I'll even be critical of Peterson, like choose one side or the other. And a lot of people are kind of like that. But I think he also does it because he wants both sides to listen to him as far as they can. But I will just come out and tell you straightforward, I'm coming from an atheist angle. Like, I understand this stuff, but I'm not hiding the ball on that. So I'm playing as if as we're just stuck with ourselves here in this world, and things happen from evolution. I think a lot of these Divinity School guys are hiding the ball hard about that. They believe less than I do, but they also believe that they're Gnostics. They believe they have all the answers. And
I think, like, you know, if Dan ends up getting tenure and then being, you know, the next Reza Aslan or something, he'll just be right out open with it again. That's what I mean. Yeah, there's the neophytes are totally cool with it. Then there's like the journeymen, they hide the ball, and then there's the leaders, they're open with it. I don't know.
I can't believe that Reza Aslan, like, one of the things that drove me nuts, Sunstone paid all this money to bring him. He got booed off stuff after he ate human flesh.
After he ate a human brain? Yeah. I don't know that story.
It rings a bell, but I guess
he got booted off of everything. And Lindsay paid for him to come out to Sunstone after that story happened, and he'd already been kind of shunned off of everything. But he had like some Netflix show where he was going to go visit all the religions of the world, and one of them was that Indian religion where they actually eat, you know, their deceased family members or something like that. So he ate human brain, and he got like CNN or whatever, just the whole world of they just weren't done with it. I guess it's just too taboo. I actually don't even understand why that was so taboo if it was part of that religious tradition.
Yeah, no, like if you're doing the anthropological documentary thing, we're talking about how people live,
and it's their family members, and that's what they do. But I think it's weird. I wouldn't do it, but I don't know why. I don't know. I could even see them firing him, but I don't know why that like abolished him.
If there's something that were like, you know, it's like medical experts say that in order to prevent Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, it's best not to consume human or primate nerve tissue because that's how you get Kuru. But I don't know, weird.
So there's
that's the other thing. It's like, this is what's so annoying. Why wasn't he bumped from social life for being? Well, yeah. Why wasn't he bumped from humanity for being a hack? He was always just a hack.
So this is one of the things. Dave Pacman,
and they love him for the hack, but then he eats a brain, and they're like, "Oh no!"
Dave Pacman, who's a total lefty, and did one of the best takedowns of Reza Aslan, doing what these Divinity School guys do, and just bragging about his degrees and using that degree to kind of like make himself seem like he was the expert in all things that had to do with all things. Because these guys with Divinity Schools and theology stuff, that like they claim Jordan Peterson gets outside of his lane, but I think theology, since it's all encompassing, these guys get out of their lane as much as anybody else. But the Reza Aslan would go and he would repeat. They even had like all the highlights of him repeating. To be clear, I am a scholar, because he wrote that book Heretic about Jesus Christ, and people ask him, why did you write that book? And he'd say, to be clear, I am a scholar of religion. And Dave Pacman did an extended video just exposing that he didn't really have all the degrees that he claimed that he said he had. But
yeah,
is it like would it have been like Bill Cosby bragging about his honorary doctorate or something like that?
Well, it was just he had some degrees, but it didn't encompass all the things that he claimed that they said.
He bit off more than he could chew with that. Bob Price's critique of that Heretic book is awesome.
Really?
The Bible Geek, the Bible Geek, he talks about it, and mostly like the biggest problem with Heretic, on top of that is, it's just not very good Bible scholarship. It's not original. None of that was original. He just copped that off of a bunch of other Bible thought over the years. Like, if that's I think that's one of the main criticisms that Bob Price made out of it. It's just like, first off, it's not new, and he's kind of doing that. Who is that guy that you always talk about? The 10,000 hours guy who, like, Malcolm
Gladwell.
Yeah, where like he's like famous as this great original thinker, where it's like, no, he just takes other ideas and he's very good at communicating them. But yeah.
Well, not to knock on, because I think Peterson has some of his own. He actually has his own scholarship to knock on these. We listen to Sam Cedars people try to knock on Peterson's expertise, but Peterson is highly cited in his own field. Highly cited. You can listen to Aidan Paladin talk about that a whole lot, who is somebody who works inside of his own field. So he is a high level scholar, kind of just like Dawkins is.
You can even get the people that like hate him, like Destiny hates the hell out of him and can misrepresent him sometimes. But even Destiny will say, like, look, on the stuff in his field, he's usually pretty spot on.
Yeah, and he's highly cited inside of it. But and that's for just actual work. The ultimate thing I'd say about him too, though, is that really Jared's reading Dostoevsky. I read Dostoevsky, and in some sorts of way, because the Peterson world pointed us, like, re-enlivened the Dostoevsky thing. We kind of all credit Dostoevsky to Peterson, but that's really kind of more of a Malcolm Gladwell thing. Peterson pointed us to it. Peterson pointed us to those ideas. And part of why they hit so big and it was only Peterson is because the universities failed so hard at pointing to any of that stuff for years. I mean, it's kind of like that people talk about there's a whitewashing universities. What there really was is there was a redwashing universities. Nobody ever talked about what happened in the communist.
You know, the other thing though is that for sure that I'm sure is a part of this, especially in modern humanities and literary programs, you can fake reading Judith Butler.
Oh yeah.
It's seminary. Just like you can fake reading the Book of Mormon just by answering the questions right. You can't fake reading Dostoevsky. You actually have to read and understand it.
Well, there's another thing too. I've joked about a lot too. I've read Gender Trouble all the way through, and I was some kid in my 20s. All those words went in my eyes. Guess who didn't read Judith Butler?
No, that's
that was
exactly
me.
what I'm saying.
Like we didn't, especially in that time frame. I didn't understand a lick of it back then.
Peterson pushing Dostoevsky isn't really like him trying to claim ideas that aren't his, because he always
no, not at all. He's not.
And it's not even just that. He doesn't just cue me into Dostoevsky. My wife and I will every week on like Sunday we'll watch a show, because he also does in his book, he gives like this gorgeous explanation of The Little Mermaid, the final battle in that. He gave this gorgeous explanation of Sleeping Beauty. So we actually went back and watched the 1968 Sleeping Beauty cartoon because of what he said. And it's not like he's taking credit for that. It's
some of that's directing it towards you
into something. He's like, look, this is something you probably overlooked, and there's something there. Look again.
Yeah, it's directing it towards Jung and archetypes and ideas like that. And I think he even takes Jung more. I love that he directed me towards Jung. I think he takes Jung more seriously than I take Jung, but I love Jung. Like I love taking that archetypal view and love reading stuff into that. The Jung thing kind of goes all the way with it, that it's fully 100% this scientific psychology all the way. I think it's kind of more in the literary realm, but I love it. And I don't think you have to take it as like, it's like a little bit like the Freud stuff, but it's really interesting to go down those routes. And then, of course, he taught everybody a lot about personalities and the big 5 personality trait. That stuff's become mainstream because of him talking about it, which is a bit of what the postmodernists have a problem with. It might be the main reason they have a problem with him is because he points to that there's nature in all of us, and they hate that.
There's one thing that I get, because I haven't read Jordan's book, I haven't read Jung, I haven't read all of Dostoevsky, but like one thing that he absolutely said that set me down a rabbit hole was, I don't even remember what it was, it's some clip where he's talking about mass shooters, and he talks about how after a mass shooting, everybody always goes, why? And he's like, well, they left a journal telling us why. Read it. And so it was that like I went down a rabbit hole where for 6 months, all I did was read the journals of mass shooters, and it was very interesting and informative. But yeah, like just that kind of thing, where it's like, that's
he pointed it. He just pointed at stuff, kind of how Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah. But yeah, because it really is an interesting point. They're like, why does everybody say why? Like they told us why. It might be hard to understand. We might not agree with them, but they told us why. And the answer is like, that's the thing is like Peterson would love is because like from distilling everything I've learned from mass shooters, this is what you watch out for. When somebody comes to you and says, I hate the world and I am God, bad combination. I hate the world and I am God. That's a mass shooter.
I'm not going, this is going to be hyperbolic, but this is a bit of what I feel from the Divinity Skool guys. And it's not the same, like they're going to go be shooters or something like that, but it is some sort of level of like, I hate society and I'm here to change it.
Yeah.
So we're going to start going down the TikTok rabbit hole.
Christ.
I'm going to listen, but I got to go feed my cat, but I'll be on listen mode.
Are you ready to judge your first TikTok video? All right, you're gonna hate me for this. Yep. Go gadget TikTok.
Oh, fuck you. I need my first shot. You motherfucker.
Oh, it was TikTok, man. TikTok just does that. Okay.
That's what I said. What song is it? I don't fucking know. You're not very good.
We can do a whole episode on scantily clad bad guitar playing girl.
Oh, guess what I got lined up? Do you think she was do you think so that she had like, how many views is that? Let's see how many views this one has. Sorry, we're gonna jag for a little bit.
How many really buff guys did you know that would just play guitar and curl? Can you imagine like, oh yeah.
I can start doing like shredding. something like that.
I was the people who are like most willing to show off their skills that they don't have. Like the people who are really into it don't want to show off until they're really good at it. And so I remember this guy. He was like really wanting to be a show off, and he was in beginner guitar class. He's sitting he's got these girls around him, and he's sitting in the hallway during lunch. And I'm not kidding you. He's playing Jingle Bells and fucking it up within the first 2 notes, which are the same note.
Dun, 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 dun. Is she playing or is she not playing?
It's open tuning.
She's not playing.
She's just playing.
She's not picking anything.
She's not even playing. Yeah.
She might be, but it's just.
If she's playing anything, it's open tuning, and she's just strumming a couple of strings doing power bars.
Like Mark Hoppus could like pick circles around her. My God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, like,
I hate to break it to us, and even to these Divinity Skool guys. Look at this. This has 100,000 views.
The comments are always fun on that one because I keep getting her videos now, and Kevin's mad at me because now he's getting the video. It's a division. It's always like, put a fucking shirt on is like half the comments. and then the other half of them are like, don't listen to the haters, babe.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah,
they
dude.
really are. They're like, oh, you're really good. Keep it up. You look great. You sound good.
I call it and I noticed this at work. I call it the maybe she'll fuck me instinct that a lot of men have. And it's insane how far the maybe she'll fuck me instinct will take me into simping.
Okay,
No,
what's
that's their whole business. That is their whole business. Literally, is just playing to guys. Maybe she'll fuck me if I'm nice. Oh my God. Oh Jesus. She spent more time learning how to do her hair than she ever spent practicing guitar.
She didn't even play anything. Oh.
It's the beginning
That's
to
all of it.
Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
115,000 views.
She did that final slide, you know.
I mean, like, if she spent as much time practicing as she spent waxing her legs, she'd be good at guitar.
Watch this one. I like this one. Oh no, this one. No, hold on.
And they don't even get the best take. I remember like one of the first things I did when I was learning guitar was I recorded on my shitty like Razor flip phone me playing just the intro to Kryptonite by Three Doors Down. I thought it was so fucking cool. And like I didn't even want to get the best take. I was like, screw it. I tried it twice and it sounds kind of crazy. And I made it my ringtone. And one of my friends heard that me get a call. Like, is that you playing Kryptonite? And I was like, okay, I need to make some changes.
No, that was Kryptonite.
Look at this.
No, is it really?
Almost 26,000 views.
Supposed to be on lockdown.
Vanessa, I'm a material girl.
What?
You can't spend your whole paycheck on another guitar, but I'm a material girl.
Jesus Christ.
26,000 views.
I'm just
sewing
the
nothing
guitars,
to do with her
you know.
Nothing to do with her wardrobe.
All she said is she wanted to buy a guitar.
I know. Okay,
Oh.
another one of these.
It is a novelty-sized flag.
Yeah. I explained it to Chris. It was so I could fit it in my longboard backpack that carries my longboard. It's like, it won't fit any other liquor.
1750 milliliters? What's the capacity of that?
It's 64 ounces.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Jesus Christ. That's okay. So this guy on my mission was.
I don't know if he's even playing.
He was a
that,
guitar god, right? You could ask him to play anything. He was absolutely amazing, and he was making a joke with me. He's like, you know how you know that someone doesn't really know how to play guitar? And I was like, how? And he just started playing "Come As You Are" by Nirvana. Like they'll just play you this.
This one, I don't know if this is how this actually goes. If this is how the song, I don't know if this is the girl sucking or if this is how the song actually goes. Okay, I think it's suck, but. Is that how the song goes?
There's no guitar in the song, but
it's not. Not even.
Oh my god.
Like, but so okay, there's definitely there's a
57,000
human,
views.
there's a human psychological phenomenon going on because we know that 98% of those views are going to be men. But
Yeah.
like, is it because like if it was just the girl swaying her hips dressed like that, would it be less views or more? And like I'm working this through live in front of you right now, but like, so is it? I guess I think on both sides, because one thing, the girl is like, oh, I'm not just doing eye candy because I'm a young, attractive girl in a bikini. Actually, I'm a talented guitar player. And then on the other side, it's like, oh no, I'm not watching softcore porn. I'm just really into guitar.
So I compare this to I've thought about this. It's kind of like the gamer girl, the girl that tries to. I think it's just that I'm super hot. I'm mostly naked. I'm also into the thing that you're into. Like gamer guys have this fantasy of this. Like, you know what? I would love nothing more than to just deep throat you while you play Fortnite, and then I'll play it with you too, or whatever. And then the problem is, I told my wife this the other day, and a bunch of other people. I was like, you know what? If we ever got divorced or anything ever happened to you, I might try to marry someone again. And I've decided that, like, if I ever did, if they were into the same music that I'm into, that's a red flag, and I'm not really gonna go for them because every girl that likes the music that I like is just insufferable. It sounds amazing in theory. It's like it's like going after Ramona.
You guys didn't understand that it wasn't about males, females. It was a war against meritocracy. Because listen to this. 204 views.
Take your shirt off and get more views.
How dare you have talent?
Genuine talent. Actually good at guitar.
She even did the
She's got
hashtag
the
female
posture,
guitarist.
everything is correct. she's even very nicely dressed, but it's not a bikini, so that's not 10,000 views.
Was that? I think was that you sent that video saying that the amount of clothes that a woman wears is inversely proportional to her talent on the guitar.
She just broke, right? Yeah. The skin you're showing is inversely proportional to how good you are at guitar.
Oh, well, I knew that one would have set you guys off. Cleanse the palate.
200 views.
Cleanse the palate. Let's
bummed out Kevin missed that.
So let's look at this post BYU grad, Divinity Skool, works for the LDS Church guy on TikTok.